Welcome to the Special Needs Kids Are People Too podcast with Amy Bodkin, EDS. Amy is an autistic adult who also happens to be a school psychologist turned special needs consultant and public speaker. She's also a homeschooling mom to 2 autistic kiddos, a yoga instructor, a card-carrying Trekkie, and an all-around fun person. And last but not least, Amy is an advocate for seeing every child as a person, not a diagnosis. Because a special needs kid is just like any other child, just more so. Here's Amy Bodkin.
Hi, I'm Amy Bodkin, coming to you from the blanket fort in my office, and welcome to Special Needs Kids Are People Too. Last time we talked about the book Childhood Disrupted and how going through 2020 and 2021 has been such a rough year for everyone, and that it has likely caused trauma for most people in some ways, and how we need to start working through some of that, and especially what we can do to potentially support our children. And that's the topic of our talk today. How can we support our children? We already talked about how one of the best things we can do for our kids is deal with our own stuff. We've got our own baggage, and if we don't deal with our baggage, it's going to impact the way we react to the world around us instead of freeing us up to respond in a thoughtful, healthy way. So today we're going to talk about ways that we can support our kids and help them start to deal with their stuff. First thing to do, reduce pressure and expectation and try to provide as much support and security as possible. I don't know if you've ever experienced watching a toddler who gets a new baby brother or sister, and then they were potty trained, but then they start to regress and start to want to use diapers again. A lot of times that's because they're feeling a little bit of a lack of security at the moment, because their life has suddenly changed. And so a lot of times when we feel a lack of security, we go back to what felt secure. What were the things we were doing when we felt secure before? And for a lot of kids, sometimes that's going back to a developmental stage where they felt safe before. A lot of you have probably seen behaviors in your kids this past year that you haven't seen in a long time. And a lot of it is about them trying to find that safety and security that they feel is a little off at the least with all of the changes. And reduced expectations is really important. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite graphics, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I talk about this a lot. I'm actually going to be producing a parent course on this on my website, amybodkin.com. Maslow's hierarchy of needs actually came out as a meme during the pandemic. It's a pyramid with layers of different needs, and the most basic needs are at the bottom, and the needs that require the lower needs are at the top. So I'll tell you what it's really like, and then I'll tell you what they did in the pandemic in case you missed it. So the bottom level is your physiological needs, your most basic needs. The next level is safety, and then love and belonging. Next is esteem, and finally at the top, we get self-actualization. Now we're going to go through what all of those are in just a moment, one at a time. During the pandemic, people liked to add an extra lower level at the very bottom, and they tended to label that one toilet paper and hand sanitizer. Which, based on people's shopping patterns, you would think that that would be what the basic needs were. It is not. So, let's start off with physiological needs. One thing you should be aware of, learning happens in self-actualization. So, before we even worry about education, we need to have all these other things in place. which was a problem with the pandemic, because when we went into the pandemic, everybody thought immediately about toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and education. Kids don't learn well when they're stressed. So prioritizing education was kind of the last thing we needed to be really thinking about. Not that, children didn't still need their friends or their teachers or their routines, things like that. But learning really isn't something that we can do when we're in a state of stress. And when a lot of life changes really fast, we're in a state of stress. So let's start with the physiological needs. That's going to be things like air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing. Also being able to poop or pee. It's a thing. Have you ever thought about babies? If they are eating, sleeping, and pooping, they're fine. But if you've got a baby who's not sleeping or not eating or not pooping, we have problems. And they let you know, usually. And then also a big fancy word, homeostasis. That basically means balance. And what it's trying to get at is that for all these physiological needs, we need them in proper balance. If you get too much oxygen, it can be too much oxygen for you to breathe well. If you get too much water, you can get dehydrated. You can even die from drinking too much water. There was a lady one time who was playing a game for a radio station, and she was trying to win some kind of, I think, video game or something, and you were supposed to see how much water you could drink, and she actually ended up basically overdosing on water. Your body, generally speaking, knows what you need and what proper balance you need if you listen to it. But if you don't listen to it, then it can make you really sick. Food, you need that in proper balance. You can't go around eating kale and nothing else. Kale doesn't have everything you need. Despite the fact that it's healthy, it doesn't have everything you need. Everything needs to be in balance. So those are our physiological needs. If you're starving, you are not in a place where you can learn. If you're dehydrated, you're not in a place you can learn. If you're extremely constipated, you are not in a place you can learn. And obviously, if you're not breathing, you're not in a place you can learn. So obviously, we have to have those things in place. And during the pandemic, sometimes these things weren't things that people always had. Food and water were a problem at times. Well, maybe not so much water, definitely food. For some people, sleep was a real problem due to all of the change in anxiety. Safety needs, that's the next level. This is going to include things like personal security, employment, resources, health, having access to your things, the security of family, of morality even. Having those things that are important to the security of that the rails of your life kind of run on in a way. And this was a problem for a lot of people during the pandemic. I mean, personal security, you're going through a whole lot of life changes really fast. Employment, lots of people lost jobs. Loss of resources, can we say toilet paper and hand sanitizer at the very least? Health. There was a lot of concern over health, obviously. Property or security of having your things. Well, it became very hard to get certain things. It was very difficult to get rice for a while there. So there were a lot of things like that. Family. Some of us were separated from families for a very long time. And then of security of morality, a lot of us have faith traditions that are very important parts of our lives. And in a lot of ways that changed as well. Holidays changed. Holidays are usually very connected to our moral philosophies and religions. And all those things got very disrupted, which could definitely mess with how safe a child feels. The next level is love and belonging. That's going to include friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection, friendship. I think I already said that one. But it's not just the people or the relationships. It's, are they healthy ones? How are they treating you? Are they accepting you as you are? Or is there judgment there? Or are there strings attached? And that's really tough. Because we learn how to love others by our own experiences with being loved growing up. And once again, sometimes we can overcorrect depending on our experiences. I work with a lot of homeschoolers, and one of my favorite educational philosophers is a woman named Charlotte Mason. She lived in the late 1800s, and she said that yes, there is authority and obedience. They're necessary parts of life because, well, obviously you can't go around just killing people. That's not acceptable. We don't allow that. And so, yes, we have those things, but they should not be encroached upon by undue play on a child's needs. Basically, that we need to treat them with the respect that is due persons. As she put it, these principles are limited by the respect due to the personality of children, which must not be encroached upon, whether by the direct use of fear or love, suggestion or influence, or by undue play upon any one natural desire. How many times have you heard somebody scare a child into doing what an adult wants them to do? I'm going to punish you if you don't do this. Depending on the punishment, that can sound scary, especially if they're bigger than you, which the adults probably are. How many times have you heard someone use love to motivate a child? Oh, well, if you love me, you'll do this. Or, oh, but you love your mommy, please do this for me. Or, what about suggestion or influence? Well, I don't know. I don't know that that's, the way it is. I don't think so. I think that it's this way, which is a little bit of gaslighting right there. And then, of course, there's also undue play on any one natural desire. So, well, if you'll do this, I'll give you a piece of candy. If you do this, I'll give you a reward. How many times do we as adults influence children in these ways in society? We do it all the time. And that doesn't show true love and acceptance. That shows manipulation. I'm going to go ahead and read you the next section that she wrote on this topic, because otherwise I'm leaving you guys hanging, because you're thinking, well, if I can't use those, what am I supposed to use? Therefore, we are limited to 3 educational instruments: the atmosphere of environment, the discipline of habit, and the presentation of living ideas. The PNEU motto is education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. And what she means here is that we have the atmosphere that our children are surrounded by, and that includes both people and things. And so basically she's saying that who we are today has the biggest influence on who our children become. one of them, one of the three. It's not how you decorate your home or the things that you provide for your children or the learning experiences you provide for them. It's the person that you are. So you definitely want to be the kind of person that you want your children to grow up to be like. Accept who you are. Love who you are. But then grow. Deal with your stuff. Move forward. And now for a word about our sponsors. Today's sponsors are me and a Charlotte Mason Plenary. You can find out more about my advocacy work, working with parents and professionals to provide support for special needs families and children, and encouraging people to see children as people at amybodkin.com. Charlotte Mason Plenary is a homeschool company that supports children of all sorts of different types of needs with finding a curriculum that is a perfect fit for you and your family, doing it your way. Definitely check out the free 20 Principles study. It is fantastic. There are videos for Charlotte Mason's 20 Principles beginning with Children Are Born Persons, which is why she is my favorite educational philosopher. You can find out more about a Charlotte Mason Plenary and check out the 20 Principles study at cmplenary.com. The other thing she mentioned was discipline. And what she means by that is that our brains develop ruts. When we do things over and over again, we get into habits. And it's those habits that help us develop fluency with certain types of academic skills. And the things that we do over and over again in life are the habits that we develop. And what she's simply saying is that we need to be mindful of the habits we're developing and make sure that they are helpful and useful. And then the last thing that she said that we have to be able to use is education is a life. And by education is a life, she means that children's brains, you could think of them like a living organism. They too need to be fed. And when we don't feed our children's brains with ideas, they tend to stagnate. They need something to think about. That was another thing she said as well about children. She was a great observer of children. She said every day a child needs something to love, something to think about, and something to do. When I was homebound for a year, that was something that I told myself over and over again, was I need to find something that I love each day, something to do, and something to think about. And as long as I could find those three things, then I felt like I could be content being homebound. And so that was something we actually tried to do for a little while during the pandemic, was trying to look for those things, because it's not always about what's happening in the circumstances. A lot of times it's really how you deal with it. And, depending on what our mental health is at the moment, we don't always deal with things as well. And that's okay. We just don't want to stay there. And so that's really the long explanation of love and belonging, but it's really important because that level leads us to the next level, which is esteem. Esteem doesn't happen without love and belonging first, and that means unconditional love and acceptance. And some of us have not learned that yet. No offense. Your child is your child. It does not matter what your child does. It doesn't matter the choices your child makes. It doesn't matter what your child looks like. It doesn't matter if your child's different. It is your child. And that's the reason we love our children. Because they're ours. That's it. It's not because of who they are or what they do. It's because they're ours. And when we can love and accept and appreciate them as they are, no strings attached, even when we disagree with them, even when they're different from us and we don't understand or relate as well. That sets us up for esteem. Esteem is respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, sometimes strength or freedom, but mostly it's self-esteem. And that can come in the form of confidence or achievement or success or respect of others or respect by others. Those things don't come until we can love and accept ourselves, and we learn that by being around healthy people who love and respect us. And this is critical. Absolutely critical. But you cannot build self-esteem in a child. It comes from within. And it comes from learning a healthy way of seeing yourself and loving yourself and appreciating yourself. You have value because you are my child. Not because of what you do, not because of the decisions you make, not because of what you think. You have value because you are. And then that finally leads us to the last step, self-actualization, the desire to become the most that one can be. It's also where our sense of creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, acceptance of facts, lack of prejudice, and all those good, important, like growth things happen there. And quite honestly, that might explain some of the disagreements we seem to be having between ourselves right now. Because a lot of the disagreements we have tend to be centered around things that are all in the self-actualization category. We're all still struggling with the basics of the physiological safety, love, and belonging ones. We don't have, well, the security to be able to deal with those more complex issues. And that's also where learning happens. That's where education happens. So think of it kind of like a map. It's a map to help support your child. And it's a map that only goes in two directions, up and down. The goal is not to get to self-actualization and stay there. Things will happen in life that will threaten the security of other levels. The goal is to know where you are and to look at what's the next thing, what's the next step I need, how can I get that, and to always be looking for where am I now and what's the next thing. That's all we have to ask. When we're able to spend most of our time in self-actualization, learning happens. We don't have to force it. A lot of it tends to happen naturally. And a lot of the reason that a lot of special needs kids, not all, but a lot, have trouble with learning is because we're missing these lower steps. We don't feel secure for a variety of reasons. Anxiety being a really big one, especially if there's sensory processing differences. Now, beyond Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I really don't think that you can overestimate the importance of that, I also still highly recommend that you get the book Childhood Disrupted that we talked about last time. There were several different ideas suggested in that book of ways to help kids process through trauma. And that is something that is beyond what Maslow's hierarchy of needs is focused on. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is focused on providing that environment of safety and security for children so that they feel safe. They know they're taken care of. They know they don't have to do the problem solving. They don't have to be on alert looking out and figuring out, well, if this happens, I'll do this, and if this happens, I'll do that. And you can really look at your child's physiological needs to tell if you're having some of these kinds of issues. Look at how they're eating or drinking or their hydration, their sleep. Sleep is huge for kids. And also for adults, sometimes we process our big feelings through sleep, or it can disrupt sleep, or we can have nightmares. I had a recurring nightmare for 20 years off and on due to a traumatic experience when I was a child. When I was in 6th grade, I really hadn't learned much history yet. It wasn't something we really taught at that age, and I didn't have much exposure to it. And my class went to a traveling Holocaust museum, and it was my first real experience with history. And we saw pictures and film footage, and our docent was a survivor. And I was absolutely terrified. I would wake up from nightmares thinking that there were Nazis under my bed. Because I just couldn't imagine that something like that could happen. It was a complete shock to me. And that's really the thing about trauma with children. It's the shock of it. If your child has never experienced not being able to go to school after they're used to going to school, or they've not experienced going to the grocery store and not seeing food on the shelves, if they've never experienced those things, it's quite the shock. Even if they have experienced those things, it's not necessarily a positive, but sometimes the shock of a sudden change can be more traumatic in some ways for people than maybe more significant problems, but with a slower change. It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges. You can't say that one trauma is worse than another, really. All trauma is trauma. But any trauma that is a threat to your personhood, whether it's a threat to your physical body, to your mental state, or to your own spirit, those can be terrifying to deal with. Some of the ideas for processing these things mentioned in Childhood Disrupted, I won't mention all of them, and not all of them are appropriate for children because a lot of this work was focused on adults processing childhood trauma. But I will mention a few. The one I found that I used in the book when I was going through this was yoga. And as an autistic adult, I'm very much disconnected from my body in a lot of ways. And I really needed the experience of yoga to help me be able to learn to listen to my body and to be able to learn to listen to my mind and to connect myself, body, mind, and soul together, because it was like I had separate pieces of me floating around that needed to be brought back together to be a whole person. Another thing that was listed was martial arts, and martial arts actually came out of yoga. There are quite a few similarities in philosophy, and both of those can be good for children because children are less likely to process emotions verbally. They, generally speaking, need something that involves movement is always good. But you can also employ things like music therapy, art therapy. Loved dance therapy. I almost had a minor in dance when I was in undergrad. And I loved dance. I had a teacher who was a dance therapist. And she talked about how we could use dance to work through things. Maybe to make a dance expressing something that was traumatic or a journey you have gone through in your life. So there's lots of fun things that we can do with children, but you want to think about things that are more action-oriented. And honestly, the thing that will make the biggest difference is providing them with a safe and secure environment. The more they feel safe and secure and supported and accepted, as they are, no strings attached, probably the better they're going to recover. Being patient, letting them go back steps developmentally, and supporting them as they work back through. Art therapy, dance therapy, yoga, martial arts, all those things are wonderful. Connecting, meditation can be good, although difficult for children unless you're using visual meditation. Prayer can be good, especially ones that are either more liturgical or repetitive. Sometimes I know some families that are Catholic will use rosary beads. That can have a really helpful meditative type effect. There's just lots of different things you can do. You pick what's right for your family, what works for your kid. That's the big thing. Just because you like it doesn't mean it's going to work for your kid. So introduce them to different options. Help them discover what clicks for them. But mostly, love them and create as safe and secure of an environment as possible, and reduce expectations down until you find that space where you're able to satisfy physiological, safety, love and belonging, and esteem needs. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time.
We hope you had fun listening to today's episode and gained some new insights into the wonderful variety of people in our world. You can find out more about Amy's advocacy work at amybodkin.com. And remember, special needs kids are people too.